Winter is coming. Even so, Russian gas is still flowing through Ukraine. What's that all about? And what are the consequences of the cost of gas supply to Europe? Is this the time to prepare our woolly sweaters and socks? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine has cast a long shadow over the future of Russian gas transit through Ukrainian territory. As the current transit agreement nears to expiration at the end of 2024, questions arise about its future. Ukraine's recent military actions, including the seizure of strategically important gas infrastructure in Russia's Kursk Oblast, have not yet significantly impacted the flow of Russian gas to the European Union. Despite some initial disruptions, gas transit through Sudzha meeting point in Kursk has largely returned to normal levels. This stability, however, belies the underlying tensions and risks associated with the ongoing conflict. Ukraine has officially rejected the possibility of extending the current transit agreement with Russia, with President Volodymyr Zelensky and other officials exploring alternative options, such as gas supplies from Azerbaijan. This stance is supported by the European Commission and most EU member states, who are keen to reduce their dependence on Russian hydrocarbons. Russia, on the other hand, continues to benefit financially from the transit of gas through Ukraine despite the ongoing war. The continued flow of gas suggests that neither party currently has a strong initiative to halt the transit prematurely. Several scenarios could unfold as transit agreement's expiration date approaches, including a complete cessation of Russian gas transit through Ukraine. Ukraine has been preparing for this possibility. Recent stress tests indicate that the country's gas pipeline system can operate in reverse mode, handling supplies from the western direction. Such a disruption, however, could lead to short-term spikes in gas prices and increased uncertainty in the EU market. Despite sanctions and vows to end energy imports from Russia, Moscow still remains a significant gas supplier for the EU. Potential gas disruptions from Russia could push the bloc to increase efforts to search for alternatives. The matter of Ukraine's pipelines alarms observers and officials, but the outcome remains to be seen.
My guest today, I'm delighted to introduce Filip Rudnik, who is a senior specialist at the Center for Eastern Studies here in Warsaw. Welcome once more to the programme.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you a second time. Can you outline a relatively absurd war? In war, many things seem absurd and irrational, but can you outline the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk? They have a control over Sudzha, the transit point for gas and oil. Why haven't they blown it up?
That's a trend.
What's the point of keeping that intact? Both parties fighting this terrible war, and yet this gas pipe is still flowing.
Well, there are many reasons why Ukrainians didn't seize the supply through this gas transit point. But there are also many reasons why Russians did not do it, because at the same time we need to be aware of the fact that Russians, for instance, they bomb energy infrastructure in Ukraine. Therefore, it would be due to random reasons or due to the proximity of energy infrastructure to the pipeline that would be possible that they would hit the pipeline, hence they will stop the flow. But they didn't decide to do that. And at the same time, by this Ukrainian incursion to the Kursk Oblast, we could see that they, as you mentioned, they maintain the control on this transit point. Perhaps they could, for instance, stop the flow by simply tightening the screws, by simply turning it off. They didn't
destroying anything.
Yeah.
Just switch the thing off?
Yeah, but at the same time, we need to be aware that there is a contract, a transit contract signed by Ukrainian side and by Gazprom that expires by the end of the year. And cancellation of this contract due to reasons that are not foreseen in the contract, simply putting that they would be
force majeure or something.
Force majeure would be a rational argument in that. But if there would be a political decision to cease that flow, to stop that flow, that therefore Ukrainian side would be obliged to pay a fine for it. So they didn't. But at the same time, we need to take aware the whole political landscape behind it, that there is a blame game between Ukrainian and Russian sides. For instance, Russians still argue that Ukrainian side is the main obstacle in returning to the business as usual with the West. That Ukrainian side that declares that they don't want to prolong the transit contract, that they do not want to make Russian gas flow possible through their territory, that Ukrainian side, Russians argue that Ukrainian side is an obstacle, that they are a troublemaker in that area. Therefore, Ukrainians are trying to behave very cautiously and with certain degree of being pragmatic, perhaps, if that's the right word for describing the situation amid the war, in order to present themselves as reliable partner for the European customers. That Ukrainians are not to blame here. And at the same time, we need to be aware of the fact that both sides still earn from that transit. Russians, by simply selling its gas to the customers in Austria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary, while Ukrainians receive transit fees as well. Maybe it's not a big sum, but still, in the reality of war, that's the source of the hard currency, of the foreign currency for their budget. And
so
that's crucial.
Gazprom is effectively buying Ukrainian arms.
Yeah, but at the same time,
vice versa,
at the same time, Naftogaz, so the Ukrainian counterpart, buys Russian arms as well.
So you mentioned the fact that the profitability lies on the Russian side. They gain more than the Ukrainian side.
I mean, for the Russian side, I think it's far more crucial to preserve any kind of flow to the European customers, because Gazprom effectively, starting the war in 2022, but also it was already seen in 2021, when they started to reduce the supply to European customers, they lost a gigantic share of their European market, which is for them the most, the revenues from the European market, it's simply uncomparable to the ones they get from Asia, from China, and so on and so forth. Yes. The tariffs the premium is far more higher in within the European market. So they are desperate to prolong some sort of business relationship with the European customers.
You wrote in your paper about this, the termination of the contract at the end of this year. How do you see further negotiations between Russia and Ukraine on the subject? How do you envisage that happening?
Well, Ukrainians officially said that they are not ready, that they do not want to seek any kind of agreement with the Russian side, and that's understandable due to the war. But at the same time, I can imagine that to myself that there will be some sort of a scheme to make Russian gas flow going through a Ukrainian system. Although for now it seems like a very unlikely scenario, but I guess if the pressure from some European countries and from some European companies would be strong, then I think it is fairly possible that there will be some sort of way to circumvent Ukrainian side, to avoid Ukrainian side on that, meaning, for instance, that Western companies would buy Russian gas, Russian commodity already on the border between Ukraine and Russia, making that volume of gas property of a European company already in Ukraine. Of course, they would have to pay a Ukrainian operator a certain amount of money to make that gas flow, but at the same time, that would allow both sides, Ukraine and Russia, to not counter each other within these negotiations. But at the same time, it's quite cynical to do that, and I'm not ready to judge whether Ukrainians would allow that to happen.
Cynicism happens in war, I suppose, doesn't it? Really.
That's right.
What's the gas pipe, the NS2, the Nord Stream 2 has been blown up. Does that mean that Europe actually doesn't need Russian gas? You mentioned the dependence of the bilateral dependence of Europe on Russian gas and vice versa on Russian sales to Europe. Has that picture gone forever?
Europe itself is not dependent on Russian gas anymore, especially when it comes to the deliveries of Russian pipeline gas. I think the share of Russian gas in 2023 was about 5% from pre-war levels, which were amounted to 40%. So Europe kind of took the leap into the unknown, and successfully, due to the fact that they signed, like European Union and various countries signed new gas deals with Norway, with LNG companies from Qatar, from the US. So as a whole, we don't need that. But
by we, do you mean countries not countries including, for example, Hungary or Slovakia?
That's the blind spot within this European landscape, because at the same time as considering Europe as a whole, this dependency is quite minor. Therefore, we don't have to like seek any kind of reconciliation or any kind of new agreements with Russia. Yeah. But if we are focusing on certain countries like Hungary and Slovakia or Austria, which is quite often omitted in this configuration, we can see that their dependence on Russian gas is still huge. And although there were some steps taken by some of those countries in order to decrease the dependency, and the prospective outlook is quite bright, and it's possible for them to do it, all we need here is a political will and some sort of resolve towards Russia. And in the case of Slovakia and Hungary, due to their resolve, due to their posture, due to their position on geopolitical field, we know that they are very reluctant to decrease this dependency.
I mean, if I were cynical, I'd say this is a very good weapon for Ukraine to have. Ukraine has its boot on Hungarian and Slovakian jugular and Austrian jugular.
Yeah, that's right. But at the same time, we need to be aware that this weapon could backfire, because I guess right now, given the fact to what extent Ukraine is dependent on the Western support, Kyiv has to to be very much self-aware on not to pressuring some countries and European Union as a whole to a very excessive extent. And of course, we can see that no one really is worried about the fact that Hungary will not be able to receive as much Russian gas as it wanted to. But at the same time, it creates some sort of destabilization on the political level within the European Union. And I think Ukraine is perfectly aware of it. That's why they are, for instance, they didn't exclude the possibility of making the Azerbaijani gas flowing through their system, which in practice it means that this Azerbaijani gas, if physically it will be as Azerbaijani gas, that's also like debatable, but that flow would be happening through Russia.
Oh, yes,
so Russia had
through there, yeah.
So Russia would receive some sort of compensation transit fees from that.
Final question to you, Mr. Rudnik. What's just to take the Kursk incursion, the defensive, whatever we want to call it? They seem to be digging in that particular region, taking a hold of this nodal point. Do you see that as the primary objective of the invasion, or do you see other military factors involved?
That would be only my personal assessment of the situation. I do not have any access to military documents of the Ukrainian side, so let's just take that with a pinch of salt. But
we'll take that in context.
Yes, but I don't think that was the primary goal for them. I think Ukrainian military command saw that there's some sort of weak spot of the Russian military, and well, such a transit point was just some sort of byproduct. I mean, conquering that was some sort of like a byproduct of the success of that incursion. And of course, I think Ukrainians are pretty satisfied with the fact that they possess a control on that point.
Better to have it than not to have it.
Yeah, but at the same time, we need to remember that if Russians wanted to stop the flow, they would have done that already in the past.
Yeah. War, as we know, cynicism, absurdity seems to be a common factor. But Filip Rudnik, thank you very much for coming on and outlining the context of all this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
So that's all we have time for today. Do join us again next time for How We Got Here.